here we are.
Oh, fantastic. So hello guys, my favorite folks in BCI, AI, and XR. This is Sam, and I am tuning in from San Francisco, a beautiful WeWork office overlooking Chinatown, here with Sharena Rice, a tinkerer, a thinker, an inventor, and a neuroscientist who, in my humble opinion, is one of those people that the neurotech space desperately needs, because I think there's just a few people that can just catalyze it into the kind of stratosphere we need to bring that field, one step at a time. So I've been wanting to talk with you, Sharena, for quite a while. I know you've been active in your own work, but you've also influenced a lot of people. You've helped them, you've advised them. And I wanted to know from your perspective, what is your story that brought you here? And I'll give you the chance to take as much time as you want.
All right. I am glad to be in the space of neurotech. How I got here was an integration of many things, where at first it was curiosity about human behavior. Eventually it came to be, I would like to study to be a psychiatrist, possibly. So I majored in biochemistry, minored in psychology and philosophy, found that the intersection of all of these fields could be neuroscience. So then went on to study neuroscience, had quite an amazing time. I've done a lot of things as a systems neuroscientist. I've recorded from cells in dishes. I've put mice into virtual reality environments. I worked on recordings during waking and sleep behaviors, and worked on the characterization of a new brainwave even. It's called Splines, and those are 130 to 160 hertz in the retrosplenial cortex, at least in mice and rats we've found. And they only happen during REM sleep and during running behavior, it seems. So there was that journey. And also, when it comes to neurotech in particular, it was a sense of, yep, these are the right people for me to work with. I remember going to the Cleveland NeuroDesign Entrepreneurs Workshop before it was in Cleveland and before it was called NeuroDesign, all the way back in 2019. And really loved the time there. Connected with people ranging from trainees all the way up to leadership of companies in the neurotech space, and came away feeling inspired, not just by the sense of this is a cool thing to do and it's good to create new solutions in neurotech, but also the types of people in terms of their level of responsibility and how thoughtful they were, how much they honored accountability, and how they thought through things like regulations. And so from there, I continued on by just helping people where I could. I helped Jojo Platt and Arun Sridhar with a mini-series for the Scraps podcast, which is about bioelectronic medicine and about neurotech, but the thing that I helped them with was a mini-series on psychedelics called Psychedelics. And that was a great experience, partly because I learned more about what goes into these science communications, who is doing what in the field, and how to create more connections within the space. So there was that, and then helping Simply Neuroscience by speaking at Simply NeuroCon, helping Neurotech X by speaking for their various chapters in Bolivia and in India and a few other places, and generally connecting lots of dots within this, noticing what are the gaps that need to be filled, how can we better connect these dots, what is the education system not really teaching that they ideally would if people are to make the difference that may be possible with these technologies. And there was a point when I got collected by a company called Sanmai. And what Sanmai is doing is working on focused ultrasound neuromodulation as a medical device for mental health challenges. One of these challenges is anxiety, which is the most common mental health challenge that there is, affecting about 40 million Americans per year. And so since there's such a need, and because the current pharmacological solutions only help about less than half of people, then there is a clear need for this to exist and to be developed in a way that people can really believe in and count on to solve their problems. And one of the great things about bioelectronic medicine and neuromodulation is the speed of how it works. So it's great that people do not have to wait for months to find out whether the treatment worked for them, but they can get to know a lot faster because a lot of people experience good effects within one session, which is remarkable given that even transcranial magnetic stimulation often takes about 20 sessions in order to see if the person has a clinically significant effect.
Many fascinating topics right there. I would like to get back to focused ultrasound eventually, but I would like to connect the dots because your story is in some ways quite unusual, but in some ways I think there is maybe an overarching pattern. And one of the quotes that I like, paraphrasing your maybe one of the more famous quotes that you say, is that you like to work to alleviate human suffering. This is something that I've heard you say before, and it's also something that I've seen you post about. And when I look at you and what you just told us, I see that there are several maybe scales of resolution at which you look at what human existence is, maybe what human suffering is. So in addition to starting from the molecular level and studying biochemistry as your major, to then working on more experimental works and higher order functions, mental processes, and fueling that passion of yours to treat anxiety as a somewhat comparable to your psychiatric intentions. These are two different levels, and plus I also know that you've been on a retreat for quite a long time. I wouldn't even call it a retreat at this point. For over a year you spent meditating somewhere in Buddhist temples. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you find human condition and your role in influencing it?
Yeah, I lived in a temple for 22 months while I was in grad school. And part of the reason why that matters is because I think there are ways to integrate things into lifestyle that I just would not have come up with if it wasn't for doing those two things at once. And so at the beginnings of the day, it was this matter of waking up to the sound of a priest chanting and playing a Moktak, which is a wooden gong, and chanting the Great Compassion Dharani, then doing 108 prostrations, meditating, chanting, having breakfast and deep life conversations. And so this was a widening of perspective, partly because a lot of grad students, they only seem to talk with other students and with professors, and they're somewhat isolated from the rest of society. And yet I was there living with people who were sometimes, at one point, 3 times my age. And having this sense of perspective instead of living in my own head or in a bubble, I think it was good for seeing more about what life has. And so, oh yes, what is the former question?
I suppose it's how did all of your experiences lead you to this quote of yours, maybe this vision of yours, or mission of yours, rather, of alleviating human suffering?
Ah, yes. Actually, I think that the phrase would be more ideal of inverting as much suffering as possible, because alleviating suffering, it may be okay, but I can say, oh, I'm suffering so much because my coffee is too cold. Or I'm suffering because the wind blew in a certain direction that I did not like. And so there are ways that I can make up all kinds of suffering, or that various people can get caught up in things that actually don't really matter. But then when it comes to inverting suffering, I think that it's not just taking things and reducing them. Like, okay, well, what if I just made my coffee the perfect temperature all the time? And what if I made sure that the wind blew in the right direction all the time? And things like that. Rather, this is a sense of, okay, there are ways to exist with the things that arise, and you can invert suffering partly by changing perspective towards the things that are. And also, this inversion of suffering, it takes this matter of, yeah, there is suffering in life, but that's just part of how life is. And yet, sometimes you take this pain and you turn it into power. You turn it into some sort of motivation to do what you do. So, for example, I had a lot of anxiety when I was a grad student for a year, and that was really awful. And so I continue to take this perspective of reflecting back on what that time was like and think, okay, this is motivation for me to help people who are really having challenges here, who aren't able to focus on things that matter to them because they are too caught up in overwhelming worries, or they're too worried to get out of bed in the morning because they have a sense of, well, I'll just make a mistake. No wakey, no mistakey. A lot of people who make a difference in the field of medicine, they're doing it partly because they've known someone who has had a neurological condition whom they would like to help, or because there's something that is there that's really compelling to them beyond just being okay with the way things are.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. It's very insightful and a lot to unpack there. But with the limited time, I want to go back into the reality of what you're working on, and especially focused ultrasound. I understand that focused ultrasound, the jury is still out on the mechanisms of action, but somehow it's proving experimentally to be incredibly valuable. So now we have I don't want to say a surplus, but we have a sort of an inverted scale or a ratio of a lot of commercial companies trying to, say, expedite focused ultrasound into the clinic and even to people's homes as a business to consumer device. What is your take on focused ultrasound as a modality that we might learn from? And maybe do you find some risks in us going full throttle towards industry or into practices with focused ultrasound, and while we still don't understand the basic science?
I think that a lot of the basic science is going to be investigated because 20 years ago, this was barely on the radar as a technology. And so there wasn't very much research about it. So what can you do if it's something that's so novel that people don't really know what to do with it? Over time, there have become more studies. My boss, Jay Sanguinetti, is one of the pioneers of the science of this. And it's great that he's done this research to determine these effects and to find out what works. And did this even though a lot of people didn't quite believe in it. But as more people from other labs around the world have been able to repeat experiments and find similar phenomena, then that's how things become more hardened as sciences, because there's reproducibility to them. Ultrasound is a technology that can potentially do a lot. I think that it's going to really advance how people work with mental health challenges as well as deep brain stimulations, because it has that potential to go deep and to go targeted. Of course, with other neurotechnologies, people didn't quite know the mechanisms at first either. So deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, in terms of implanting leads, people didn't quite know why that worked for a long time. They just knew that it worked for a lot of people. And so that's one of the big successes in the field of neurotech, which is that deep brain stimulation companies, they got acquired by larger companies, and then they end up in people's brains so that they can actually move again and they can do things like play the guitar again, and they don't have to be so limited in the ways that they express themselves either. This technology, it has an enormous amount of potential. I think that is also important to to not overhype it too much, especially as things continue to evolve.
I have a friend that I made recently, Winslow, who already used focused ultrasound to elicit more targeted type of meditation. And he used it as a form of transitioning into the state of meditation that he desired. And just like there's guided meditation that is completely non-invasive, and people, walk you through exercises that you need to do in order to get to the states that you desire to arrive at, which we can also talk about whether that is the right way to want to meditate, have a desire of a final state. I have therefore already seen some people that have used focused ultrasound to use it in more of a day-to-day scenario and found immediate benefit from it. Immediate benefit that not just ended in a single session, but that lasted over at least 3 days from, end of one experience from Winslow. And therefore, it has a potential massive upside to what we can do with the technology. And for those BCI folks on here, there's also a fascinating work done at the Andersen group in Caltech, where they have used focused ultrasound to actually image the motor cortical activity that was involved with planning movement and executing it. And they have found that this influx of oxygenated blood cells in certain areas, certain capillaries of that motor cortex, is actually well correlated with the intended action that the person took. Now, in their case, they had to replace part of the skull with a translucent in order to actually get where they wanted, because there are still open problems to do with how you can target such specific areas when you have the cranium in the way. But it definitely has potential for even things that involve closed loop, high degree of freedom, kind of high resolution control. And I would like to end this conversation on a question, whether you have anything that you would like to plug or anything that you would like to share that we haven't had a time to talk about yet.
Yeah, I think that for people who are interested in this technology's advancements, it would be great if you could participate in a clinical trial.
Thank you very much, Sharena. It's lovely speaking with you, and I hope we can do a round 2. Everybody who's listening to this, submit your questions so we have it sooner rather than later.